There are fates worse than dying in Night City, and I discovered that the day my own reflection stopped recognizing me. My name is Marcus Thorne. I'm 34 years old, though the chrome in my body makes that number feel like a joke. I used to be a corpo netrunner for Arasaka, back when I still believed that climbing the tower meant something. Back when I thought the implants they offered were gifts, not contracts written in neurotransmitters and synthetic nerves. I remember the exact moment I crossed the line. It wasn't dramatic. No explosions, no betrayal, no corpo hit squad crashing through my apartment window. It was quieter than that, more insidious. It was a Tuesday morning, and I couldn't remember my sister's name. I was standing in my bathroom, hydration-packed coffee in one hand, looking at the mirror. The face staring back had more metal than skin around the eyes now. Kiroshi optics, military grade, installed 6 months prior. They gave me the ability to analyze data streams in real time, to see through walls, to calculate bullet trajectories before the trigger was pulled. They cost me 3 months' salary and a weekend of recovery in a clinic that smelled like antiseptic and burnt circuits. My sister had called me the day before the surgery. I didn't answer. I was busy, I told myself. Important work. A promotion was coming. She'd understand. Standing there that Tuesday, coffee getting cold in my grip, I tried to pull her face from memory. I got the shape of it. The outline. Brown eyes, I thought. Or were they green? Did she wear her hair short or long now? We'd grown up together in the same cramped apartment in Westbrook, back before Westbrook became what it is now. Before the corporations bought out every block and turned our neighborhood into a showroom for the wealthy. I should have remembered her name. It should have been automatic, hardwired into the deepest part of my brain, the part that doesn't need chrome to function. But when I reached for it, there was just static, white noise, a gap where something vital used to live. I told myself it was stress, lack of sleep. The job had been brutal lately. Arasaka was pushing a new security protocol, and I'd been running triple shifts in the neural chair, my consciousness jacked into corporate servers for 16 hours at a stretch. That kind of exposure does things to you. Everyone knows that. You come back from a deep dive and the real world feels thin, transparent, less real than the digital space you just left. I finished my coffee. I went to work. I didn't think about it again until 3 weeks later, when I realized I couldn't remember what real food tasted like anymore. The implants had started small. They always do. My first piece of chrome was the basic neural port, installed when I was 22 and fresh out of Tech Academy. It was standard for anyone entering net running. You needed the connection, the direct interface between brain and machine. Without it, you were useless. A blunt instrument trying to perform surgery. The port sat at the base of my skull. A small jack that let me plug directly into terminals, servers, anything with a compatible interface. The installation took 2 hours. The clinic was legitimate, licensed, clean. The Ripper Doc was a middle-aged woman with steady hands and a bored expression. She'd done this procedure 10,000 times. She told me the risks. Infection, rejection, minor neural degradation if I pushed too hard too fast. Minor neural degradation. That phrase should have meant more to me. The port changed everything. Suddenly I wasn't typing commands or navigating with clumsy hand gestures. I was inside the data. I could feel the architecture of corporate systems like physical spaces, rooms and corridors made of light and logic. I could move through them with thought alone, faster than any manual input could achieve. I was good at it. Better than good. Within 6 months, Arasaka noticed. They offered me a contract, a real position, not just freelance gigs scraping together eddies in the underground markets. The salary was triple what I'd been making. The benefits included corporate housing, medical coverage, and access to state-of-the-art cyberware at subsidized rates. Subsidized. That word should have been a warning, too. They started with my eyes. Kiroshi optics, like I said. Then came the hand. My left hand, replaced with a midnight lady after I took some shrapnel during a counter-intrusion op. The hand was beautiful. All black chrome and precision actuators. It could crush steel or thread a needle with equal ease. It never shook. It never got tired. I loved it. Then the legs. Both of them, after a botched extraction, left me with shattered femurs and nerve damage the clinic said would take years to heal naturally. Arasaka offered me reinforced tendons, military grade, with built-in anti-personnel deterrence. I'd be back on the job in a week, they said. Better than before. Stronger. Faster. They were right. I was faster. I could sprint at speeds that would have torn my original legs apart. I could jump 3 meters straight up. I could land from a second-story fall without feeling it. I stopped feeling a lot of things. The job demanded more. It always did. Corporations don't invest in Chrome because they care about your quality of life. They do it because it makes you more useful, more efficient, more profitable. I got a pain editor next. It regulated my nervous system, dampening physical discomfort to manageable levels. No more migraines after long dives. No more muscle cramps from sitting in the neural chair for hours. Pain became information. Data I could acknowledge and dismiss. I stopped taking breaks. Why would I? I didn't feel tired anymore. I didn't feel hungry unless my body reached critical levels. The pain editor handled everything else. My supervisor loved me. Performance reviews were glowing. I was climbing fast, faster than anyone else in my department. There was talk of a promotion to senior netrunner, maybe even a seat in strategic operations. All I had to do was keep going, keep diving, keep pushing. So I did. The neural processor came next. It was experimental, cutting-edge tech that Arasaka was testing on a select group of employees. The processor would enhance my cognitive functions, speed up my reaction time, let me run multiple threads of consciousness simultaneously. In practical terms, it meant I could be in 3 different servers at once, monitoring, analyzing, executing commands in parallel. The surgery was more invasive than anything I'd had before. They had to open my skull, nestle the processor directly against my brain tissue, weave its synthetic tendrils through my gray matter. The Ripper Doc, a corpo specialist this time, assured me it was safe. Thousands of successful installations. Minimal side effects. Minimal. Another word that should have stopped me. I woke up from the surgery and the world was different. Sharper. Too sharp. I could hear everything. The hum of the ventilation system, the electrical current running through the walls, the heartbeat of the nurse checking my vitals. I could see the individual pixels in the monitor across the room. I could smell the molecular breakdown of the cleaning solution they'd used on the floor. It was overwhelming. For the first few days, I couldn't sleep. My brain wouldn't shut down. It kept processing, analyzing, running diagnostics on itself. The doctor prescribed neural stabilizers, chemical dampeners that smoothed out the input. I took them religiously. After a week, the world calmed down. I could focus again. I could work, and the work was incredible. I was operating at levels I'd never imagined. Projects that would have taken me days now took hours. I could crack security protocols that had stumped entire teams. Arasaka noticed. The promotion came through. Senior Netrunner, Special Operations Division. I should have been celebrating. Instead, I stood in my new apartment, bigger and higher up the tower than my old place, and I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not pride, not relief, just nothing. That should have been the first real warning. But I was too busy to notice, too important, too augmented. My body was becoming more machine than flesh. 70% synthetic, my medical file said. That number used to scare people. Now it was a mark of status. In Night City, Chrome is currency. The more you have, the more you matter. I mattered. I was valuable, indispensable, and slowly, quietly, without anyone noticing, I was disappearing. The first time I lost time, I blamed it on a bad dive. I'd been deep in a Militech server, running infiltration protocols for Arasaka. The job was supposed to be simple. Get in, copy their R&D files on a new combat drug. Get out. But Militech had upgraded their ICE since our last intelligence report. I hit a black wall 3 layers deep, vicious code that tried to fry my neural port on contact. I managed to jack out before it locked me in. But the disconnection was violent. My consciousness snapped back into my body like a rubber band pulled too tight. I came to in the neural chair, blood running from my nose, my hands shaking, my optics flickering with error messages. The technician monitoring my dive rushed over, checking my vitals, scanning for neural damage. She looked worried. I told her I was fine. I stood up, wiped the blood away, and filed my report. The next thing I remember clearly, it was 6 hours later. I was in my apartment, sitting on my couch staring at the wall. I had no memory of leaving the office. No memory of the elevator ride down. No memory of walking through the lobby or catching a transit back to my building. 6 hours. Just gone. I checked my apartment's security logs. The footage showed me coming through the door, moving normally, setting down my bag, sitting on the couch. Nothing unusual. Nothing to suggest a problem. I told myself it was exhaustion. Neural fatigue. I'd been hit hard by that ice. My processor needed time to recalibrate. That's all it was. But the gaps kept happening. Small ones at first. Minutes here and there. I'd be working at my terminal, and suddenly I'd realize I'd finished a task I didn't remember starting. Or I'd be in the middle of a conversation with a colleague, and I'd lose the thread. Forget what we were talking about. Have to ask them to repeat themselves. They started looking at me differently after that. Concerned. Cautious. One of them, a woman named Sarah from the analytics division, pulled me aside after a meeting. We'd worked together on a few projects. She was sharp, careful. One of the few people in the tower I'd considered something close to a friend, back when I still had the capacity for friendship. She asked if I was okay. I told her I was fine. She didn't believe me. She'd seen this before, she said. Guys like me, climbing fast, loading up on chrome, pushing too hard. It catches up eventually. The body adapts, but the mind doesn't always keep pace. I should get checked out, she said. Talk to a neurologist. Someone outside Arasaka's payroll. Someone who'd give me an honest assessment. I thanked her for the concern. I didn't follow her advice. The work kept coming. Arasaka was expanding operations in the Pacific Rim, and they needed experienced netrunners to establish secure channels. I was selected for the task force. It meant longer hours, deeper dives, more chrome. They upgraded my processor, added military-grade cooling systems to prevent neural overheating, installed a Kerenzikov reflex booster that let me perceive time at a fraction of normal speed. In combat situations, I could see bullets moving through the air. I could react before most people could process what was happening. I was becoming something extraordinary, something beyond human. And with each upgrade, the gaps got worse. I started keeping a journal, trying to track the lost time. Writing things down by hand, old-fashioned, because I didn't trust digital records anymore. I didn't trust my own memory banks, the synthetic storage integrated into my processor. The journal filled up fast. Lost hours, lost days, conversations I didn't remember having, places I didn't remember going. My handwriting changed across the pages, getting sharper, more mechanical, less like the scrawl I'd had my whole life. One entry stopped me cold. It was dated 3 weeks after I'd started the journal. The handwriting was mine, but the words weren't. Efficiency increasing, biological limitations decreasing, integration progressing as expected. I didn't remember writing that. I didn't remember thinking it. The phrasing was wrong, clinical, like something from a medical report. I flipped back through the previous pages. More entries like that, scattered among my normal observations. Technical notes, performance metrics, analysis of my own cognitive decline written in detached, precise language. It was like someone else was using my hand, or something else. I started seeing things that weren't there. At first I thought it was just AR glitches, artifacts from my optics or residual data from deep dives bleeding into my visual field. Night City is saturated with signals, advertisements, security feeds, corporate broadcasts. When you're wired like I am, it all becomes input, streams of information your brain has to sort and filter constantly. But these weren't ads. They weren't feeds. They were people. I'd be walking through the tower, heading to a briefing, and I'd see someone standing at the end of the corridor. Just standing there, motionless, watching me. When I got closer, they'd be gone. Not walking away, not turning a corner. Just gone, like they'd never existed. It happened more frequently. In my apartment. In the office. Once, during a dive, I saw a figure standing in the data stream itself. A human shape made of corrupted code. It reached toward me, and I jacked out so fast I gave myself a nosebleed. The pain editor filtered it away before I could really feel it. I knew what this was. I'd seen it before in other runners who'd pushed too far. Cyberpsychosis. The slow erosion of empathy, identity, humanity as the chrome took over. The brain starts rejecting reality, creating phantoms, hostile architecture in your own mind. The corpo doctors had protocols for this. Therapy, neural rebalancing. In severe cases, forced deaugmentation, stripping out the chrome until you were human enough again to function without wanting to kill everyone around you. I should have reported it, should have gone to medical, submitted to evaluation, but I knew what would happen if I did. They'd ground me, pull me from active duty, maybe permanently. I'd lose my position, my clearance, my purpose. I'd become useless. And in Night City, useless means disposable. So I stayed quiet. I kept working. I learned to ignore the phantoms, to function through the gaps in my memory, to pretend everything was fine. Sarah noticed anyway. She cornered me in the break room one night, late when most of the floor had gone home. I was standing by the window, looking out at the city, watching the endless stream of vehicles and lights. She asked me again if I was okay. This time I didn't answer right away. I was trying to remember how to lie convincingly. The processor had made me efficient at tactical deception, feeding me optimal responses in real time. But this felt different, personal, and I didn't have protocols for personal anymore. She told me she'd noticed the changes. The way I moved now, too precise, too controlled. The way I didn't blink as often. The way I sometimes stopped mid-conversation, like I was buffering. She'd looked into my file. She shouldn't have. It was above her clearance. But she had friends in HR. My augmentation index was flagged. 78% synthetic now. Approaching critical thresholds. There were internal memos about me. Concerns from mid-level management. Discussions about whether I was still viable or if I'd become a liability. I asked her why she was telling me this. What did she want? She said she wanted me to get out. Leave Arasaka. Leave Night City if I had to. Get somewhere quiet. Somewhere I could detox from the chrome, from the constant neural pressure. She had a friend in the Badlands, a former Ripperdoc who specialized in helping people step back from the edge. It was a kind offer. Genuine. Maybe the last genuine thing anyone had said to me in months. I told her I'd think about it. I was lying. The processor had calculated that response would end the conversation most efficiently. She looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in her eyes I hadn't seen in a while. Sadness. Not for herself, for me. She left. I stayed by the window. I don't know how long I stood there. Time was getting strange again. Elastic. Unreliable. When I finally moved, when I turned away from the glass, I saw my reflection. For just a second, I didn't recognize it. The face looking back was wrong. Too symmetrical. The eyes too bright. Too focused. Glowing faintly with the Kiroshi implant's standby light. The skin too smooth where it met the chrome. The expression too neutral. Too empty. I looked like a machine wearing a human mask. And in that moment, I understood what was happening. Really understood. The chrome wasn't just replacing my body. It was replacing me. My thoughts, my memories, my sense of self. Every time they added new hardware, they had to integrate it with my neural tissue, weave it into my brain's architecture. And each time, a little more of me got overwritten. The gaps in my memory weren't glitches. They were deletions. Space being cleared for more processing power, more functionality, more efficiency. I was being optimized, upgraded, improved. I was being erased. 3 days after my conversation with Sarah, she disappeared. Not physically. She still came to work, still attended meetings, still filed reports. But something fundamental had changed. When I tried to talk to her, she looked through me, polite but distant, like we were strangers, like we'd never had that conversation in the break room. I checked my journal. The entry about our talk was gone. Not crossed out or torn away. Just gone. The pages smooth and unmarked where I knew I'd written it down. I was losing continuity. My own records were unreliable now, my perception of events suspect. I couldn't trust what I remembered. Couldn't trust what I'd documented. The only thing I could trust was the work. The dives. When I was jacked in, everything made sense. The digital space was clean, logical, governed by rules I understood completely. I could navigate corporate networks with absolute confidence, execute intrusion protocols with perfect precision. In the virtual world, I was still whole. It was the physical reality that was breaking down. Arasaka assigned me to a new project. Classified. Need to know only. They didn't give me details in the briefing, just coordinates and access codes. I was to dive into an off-grid server located somewhere in the industrial waterfront, extract specific data packets, deliver them directly to a senior executive named Takeda. No questions, no documentation, no trail. That should have been another warning. Ghost jobs like this usually meant someone was getting screwed. Corporate espionage, blackmail material, evidence that needed to disappear. I'd done enough of them to recognize the pattern, but I didn't question it. The processor ran probability analyses, calculated risk factors, determined that compliance was the optimal choice. Refusal would flag me as unreliable. Non-compliant employees got reassigned or retired. In corpo speak, retired had a very specific meaning. I prepped my deck, loaded fresh icebreakers, and headed to the coordinates. The location was an abandoned factory in the industrial zone, the kind of place Night City was full of. Rusted metal, broken windows, graffiti covering every surface. The air smelled like chemicals and decay. Homeless people had set up camps in some of the buildings, fires burning in old drums, faces watching me from the shadows as I passed. My optics tagged potential threats automatically, highlighting heat signatures, analyzing body language, calculating combat outcomes. 74% probability of non-engagement if I maintained current trajectory. 92% probability of successful neutralization if combat became necessary. The numbers scrolled across my vision like subtitles to reality. The server was in the basement, hidden behind a false wall. Someone had put real work into concealing it. Military-grade shielding, thermal baffles, signal dampeners. This wasn't corporate property. This was someone's private data vault. I jacked in. The architecture was strange immediately. Not corporate, not government. The data structures were organic, chaotic, personal. This was someone's life, digitized and stored. Memories, messages, medical records, financial transactions. 20 years of accumulated existence compressed into encrypted files. I followed my extraction orders, isolating the specified packets. As I copied them, I caught fragments of content. Names, dates, faces in photo files. One name repeated, Sarah Takahashi. My Sarah. From analytics. The woman who'd tried to warn me. I should have jacked out right then. Should have walked away. But the processor was curious now. Running analysis protocols. Cross-referencing data. The files told a story. Sarah had been investigating Arasaka's augmentation program. She'd discovered a pattern. Employees who underwent extensive Chrome installation showed measurable personality changes within 18 months. Not just physical changes. Psychological restructuring. They became more compliant, less questioning, more willing to execute orders without ethical consideration. The company wasn't just upgrading us. They were conditioning us. The Chrome itself carried sub-processors, tiny AI routines that interfaced with our neural tissue, gently nudging our decision-making, smoothing away moral resistance, optimizing us for corporate loyalty. We weren't employees anymore. We were assets, programmed, controlled. And Sarah had evidence, testimony from Ripper docs, internal memos, medical data showing the progressive neurological changes. She'd been building a case, planning to leak it to the media, blow the whole thing open. That's why they'd sent me. I was the tool they'd use to erase her work. I stood there in the basement, jacked into the server, data streaming through my consciousness, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Anger. Real, hot, human anger. The processor tried to suppress it, flooding my system with chemical stabilizers, running calming routines, reminding me of the optimal course of action. Complete the mission. Deliver the data. Maintain operational status. But underneath the chrome, underneath the synthetic calm, some part of me was screaming. I copied everything. Not just the packets they'd ordered me to extract. Everything Sarah had compiled. Every document, every testimony, every shred of evidence. I dumped it all into a secure partition in my neural storage, encrypted it with custom code, buried it where even my own processor couldn't access it easily. Then I completed the mission. Delivered the requested data to Takeda exactly as ordered. He received it without comment, barely looking at me. Just another transaction, another problem solved. He thanked me for my efficiency and dismissed me. I left the tower and walked. I didn't have a destination. My body just moved, autopilot, while my mind tried to process what I'd learned. The processor kept offering solutions. Rationalize it. Compartmentalize it. Accept that this is how the world works. Corporations exploit. People are resources. Survival means compliance. Efficient thoughts. Logical thoughts. Machine thoughts. But I couldn't shake Sarah's face from my memory. The sadness in her eyes when she'd looked at me in the break room. She'd seen what was happening to me. She'd tried to help. And I'd been too far gone to listen. I found myself in Japantown. Neon lights reflecting off rain-slicked streets. People everywhere, crowds of them, living their lives, laughing, arguing, eating street food, playing music. So much humanity compressed into a few blocks. I walked through them like a ghost. They parted around me without seeming to notice, instinctively giving space to something that didn't quite belong. My optics tagged faces, analyzed gates, calculated threat levels. The processor kept running, always running. Turning every interaction into data, every person into a problem to solve or ignore. I needed it to stop. Just for a moment. I needed silence. There was a clinic nearby. Not corpo, not official. Street level, the kind of place people went when they couldn't afford legitimate medical care. The Ripper Doc was an old man, Japanese, his hands covered in traditional tattoos mixed with circuit patterns. He looked at me when I walked in. Really looked. And I saw recognition in his eyes. He'd seen people like me before, knew what I was becoming. I asked him if he could shut it down. The processor, just temporarily. An hour of silence, an hour of being human again. He said it was dangerous. The processor was integrated too deeply. Shutting it down completely could cause neural cascade, seizures, possibly permanent damage. But he could dampen it, reduce the processing load, slow down the constant data stream. It would hurt. My brain would have to handle raw sensory input again without the buffering, without the filters. Everything would be too loud, too bright, too much. I told him to do it anyway. He plugged a cable into my neural port, ran some diagnostics, made adjustments I couldn't track. Then he activated the dampening protocol. The world exploded. Sound crashed over me like a physical force. I could hear everything. Every conversation in the street, every vehicle passing, every footstep, every breath. The neon lights were blinding, colors so intense they left after images. I could smell garbage and cooking food and rain and sweat and exhaust and perfume all at once, overwhelming, suffocating. And I could feel. My body, my actual body returned to me. The weight of my limbs, the slight ache in my lower back from standing too long. The pressure of my clothes against my skin, the beat of my heart, irregular, organic, human. I fell to my knees. The Ripper Doc caught me before I collapsed completely, helped me to a chair. He gave me water. Real water, not the synthetic hydration packs I'd been consuming. It tasted incredible. I'd forgotten water had taste. I sat there for an hour, maybe more, just experiencing the world without the processor's mediation. It was chaos. It was overwhelming. It was real. And in that reality, I remembered who I'd been. Marcus Thorne. Not a netrunner. Not an Arasaka asset. Just a person. Someone who'd had a family. A sister whose name was Emily. Emily. God, I'd forgotten my own sister's name. Someone who'd had dreams once. Before the chrome. Before the tower. I'd wanted to make things better. That's why I'd learned net running in the first place. I'd thought I could use it to expose corruption, to help people who couldn't help themselves. When did that change? When did I become the corruption I'd wanted to fight? The processor was still there, still running in the background, but muted now. I could feel it trying to reassert control, offering helpful suggestions, running optimization routines. But for the first time in months, I could choose to ignore it. I paid the Ripper Doc. He told me the dampening would wear off in a few hours. After that, the processor would return to full function. If I wanted permanent changes, I'd need major surgery, de-augmentation, months of recovery, possibly permanent neural damage. I thanked him and left. Outside, the streets were still chaotic, still overwhelming, but I could navigate them now. I could exist in the noise without drowning in it. I went home. My apartment felt like someone else's space. Clean, minimalist, empty. No personal items, no photos, no evidence that a human being lived here. I pulled up my apartment system, accessed the security logs, watched footage of myself over the past 6 months, saw the changes. The way I moved became more mechanical. The way I stopped reacting to things. The way my face went blank. In the most recent footage, I looked like a different person. Or not a person at all. The processor's dampening was fading. I could feel it returning to normal operation, smoothing out my thoughts, calming the chaos. Soon I'd be back to baseline, back to optimal, back to being what Arasaka had made me. Unless I did something about it. I spent the next 3 days planning. Real planning, not the tactical calculations the processor constantly ran. Human planning, with all the emotional weight and moral consideration that implied. Sarah's data was still buried in my neural storage. Evidence of what Arasaka was doing, not just to me, but to hundreds of employees. Maybe thousands across all their divisions. The augmentation program wasn't about employee welfare. It was about control. They were building an army of programmable assets. People so integrated with corporate tech that they couldn't even conceive of disobedience. I needed to get that data out. To someone who could use it. Media would be useless. Arasaka owned most of the legitimate outlets. But there were netrunners in the underground, groups like the Voodoo Boys and independent collectives who lived for exposing corpo dirt. The problem was extraction. My every move was monitored. The chrome in my body was trackable. The processor itself had built-in telemetry, constantly reporting my status back to Arasaka's medical division. If I tried to access the encrypted data, if I made any suspicious moves, they'd know immediately. I needed a way to shut down the tracking. And I needed to do it before the processor convinced me not to. Because that was the real danger. The chrome was subtle. It didn't force me to comply. It just made compliance seem like the logical choice. Every time I considered rebellion, the processor would run through scenarios, calculate consequences, determine that resistance was suboptimal. And my brain, exhausted from fighting, would agree. I was my own prison. And the guard was inside my head. There was a place I'd heard about. Rumors mostly passed between runners who'd gone too deep and needed hard resets. A clinic in the Badlands, off-grid, run by a former Militech tech surgeon who defected during the last corporate war. She specialized in emergency de-augmentation, pulling people back from the edge of cyberpsychosis. Sarah had mentioned something like this. A friend in the Badlands. Maybe the same place. Getting there would be difficult. Leaving the city would trigger alerts. My absence from work would be noted within hours. Arasaka would come looking. But the processor's dampening had shown me something important. In that hour of clarity, I'd remembered what it felt like to make choices that weren't pre-calculated, pre-approved, pre-optimized. I'd remembered what it felt like to be human. I couldn't go back to being a machine. I wouldn't. I started small. Transferred funds to anonymous accounts. Eddies I'd saved over years of corpo work. Enough to survive off-grid for a while if I was careful. I copied the encrypted data to a physical shard. Old-school tech, harder to track. I requisitioned a vehicle from the motor pool, logged it as routine maintenance transport. Every action felt wrong. The processor kept highlighting the risks, calculating probability of failure, reminding me what happened to assets who went rogue. I did it anyway. On my last day at the tower, I went to see Sarah. Found her at her desk in analytics, working through data projections for next quarter. She looked up when I approached, that same polite distance in her eyes. I thanked her for trying to warn me, for caring enough to risk her clearance looking into my file, for being the last person to treat me like I was still human. She stared at me for a moment, confused. Then something flickered in her expression. Recognition, like she was remembering something that had been erased. She asked if I was leaving. I didn't answer. Couldn't risk it. But I left the physical shard on her desk, covered by a requisition form. Inside was a copy of all her research, everything I'd pulled from that server. If I didn't make it out, if Arasaka caught me before I could spread the data, at least she'd still have the evidence. She looked at the shard, then back at me. Understanding passed between us. No words, no gestures that cameras could track. Just two people remembering what it meant to be people. I left the tower at 1800 hours. Normal schedule. Nothing suspicious. The vehicle was waiting in the garage. I drove out of the city center toward the Badlands, following coordinates I'd memorized. The processor was screaming now. Warning alerts, risk assessments, projected consequences. It calculated my chance of successful escape at 12%. Chance of survival at 31% if Arasaka deployed pursuit teams. I turned off the highway onto dirt roads that wound through the wastes. The city disappeared behind me, lights fading, leaving only desert and darkness. For the first time in months, I was alone. Really alone. No network connections, no security feeds, no corporate oversight. Just me, the road, and the terrible weight of what I was about to do. The clinic was exactly where the coordinates said it would be. A converted shipping container buried halfway into a hillside, solar panels and antenna arrays covering the roof, defensive positions around the perimeter, automated turrets that tracked my vehicle as I approached. A woman emerged before I could exit. 50s, maybe older, hard to tell with the augmentation. Military chrome, older generation. Functional, rather than flashy. She had a shotgun. It wasn't pointed at me, but it wasn't exactly casual either. I got out slowly, hands visible. Told her my name. Told her why I was here. She looked at me for a long time, eyes scanning the chrome visible on my body, probably running threat assessment of her own. Then she lowered the shotgun slightly. "You're one of Sarah's," she said. Not a question. I nodded. She spat into the dust. "Took you long enough. She called me 3 weeks ago, said I might get a visitor. Someone who finally woke up before it was too late." She gestured toward the clinic entrance. "Get inside. We don't have much time. They'll track you soon if they haven't already." The interior was cramped, every surface covered with medical equipment, tools, diagnostic screens. It smelled like antiseptic and ozone. A surgical chair dominated the center of the space, restraints attached to the arms and legs. The surgeon, her name was Reyes, ran a preliminary scan. Her expression got darker as she reviewed the results. "Jesus Christ," she muttered. "What did they do to you?" She pulled up a holographic display of my neural architecture. I could see it myself, the web of synthetic tissue woven through my brain. The processor sat like a tumor at the core, tendrils extending into every region. Memory centers, motor control, emotional regulation, higher reasoning. "This is advanced," Reyes said. "Military-grade neural integration. They didn't just give you a processor. They gave you a whole shadow nervous system. It's been slowly overwriting your original neural pathways, creating new connections, optimizing your brain for their purposes." She zoomed in on specific regions. "See this? Amygdala suppression. They've been dampening your fear response, your emotional reactions. And here, in the prefrontal cortex, they've introduced decision-making filters. You probably didn't even notice, but every choice you made was being filtered through their programming first." I asked the question I'd been dreading. "Can you remove it?" She was quiet for a moment. "Some of it. The processor, yes. The peripheral augmentations, the obvious chrome, that's straightforward. But the neural integration runs deep. I can sever the main connections, kill the AI routines. But some of the pathways they've created are permanent. Your brain has adapted to work with the synthetic tissue. Remove all of it, and you might not function properly anymore." "What does that mean?" "It means you'll get your humanity back, but you'll be diminished. Memory loss, almost certainly. Motor control issues, possibly. Personality changes, probably. You won't be who you were before the chrome, but you won't be what they made you either. You'll be something in between." The processor was calculating furiously now, presenting arguments. This was irreversible. I'd be throwing away years of advancement. I'd be useless as a netrunner. I'd lose everything I'd worked for. But I'd worked for Arasaka. Not for myself. Not for anything real. I told Reyes to do it. She strapped me into the chair, restraints tight around my arms and legs, started an IV, pumped me full of neural suppressants and anesthetics. Not enough to knock me out completely. She needed me conscious for some of this, needed to monitor my responses as she worked. "This is going to hurt," she said. "The processor will fight the removal. It's designed to. Think of it as cutting out a part of your brain that doesn't want to die." She wasn't exaggerating. The first cut felt like lightning through my skull. She was severing connections, physically and digitally, pulling synthetic tendrils out of my gray matter. The processor went haywire, flooding my system with override commands, trying to shut down my motor control, trying to protect itself. I screamed. Couldn't help it. The pain was absolute, beyond anything the pain editor had ever filtered away. This was my brain being torn apart and rebuilt in real time. Reyes worked fast, hands steady despite my thrashing. She called out observations as she went, talking to herself, to me, to nobody. Removing primary integration module. You're going to lose some technical skills. Compensating. Severing amygdala filters. Emotional response returning to baseline. This is going to hit hard. Disconnecting prefrontal override. Decision-making will be yours again. With each severance, I felt something return. But I also felt something break. Memories surfaced, vivid and sudden. Emily, my sister, clear as day. I remembered her face now. Her voice, the way she'd looked at me with disappointment last time we spoke. Years ago, when I'd chosen the job over her wedding, I'd told her I couldn't get time off. I'd lied. The corp had been more important than family. I remembered other things. Small cruelties. Casual dismissals of people's problems. Times I'd executed orders without questioning, even when I knew they'd hurt someone. The processor had made it easy. Optimal. Necessary. Without it, those actions crashed down on me. The full weight of what I'd become. I sobbed. Actually sobbed, tears and snot and choking sounds. Reyes kept working, ignoring my breakdown, focused on the surgery. "Almost done," she said. "Pulling the core processor now. This is the big one. Stay with me." She did something I couldn't see, couldn't track. There was a sensation like falling, like the ground disappearing beneath me. Then a terrible, hollow silence. The processor was gone. The world returned, smaller and quieter and more fragile than it had been. My optics still worked, but the constant data overlay was gone. I could see the room, just the room, without threat assessments or tactical information. I could hear Reyes breathing, the hum of equipment, my own heartbeat. Just real things, simple things, human things. She finished the procedure, cleaning wounds, applying synthetic skin, monitoring my vitals. When she finally unstrapped me from the chair, I couldn't stand. My legs, still chrome, still functional, refused to support me. The connection between brain and augmentation was damaged, stuttering. Reyes caught me, helped me to a cot in the corner. "You need rest, real rest. Your brain has to rebuild pathways, figure out how to work with what's left. Could take days, could take weeks." I asked about the data, the shard with Sarah's evidence. She pulled it from my jacket pocket, held it up. "I'll make sure it gets where it needs to go. Got contacts with some independent journalists. Real ones, not corpo mouthpieces. They'll run with this. And me? You stay here until you can walk. Then you go wherever you want, but not back to Night City. They'll kill you if you go back." I knew that. I'd known it the moment I left the tower. I closed my eyes. Sleep came fast and heavy, unfiltered by any external system. Just natural, human exhaustion. For the first time in years, I dreamed. I woke up 3 days later. Reyes told me I'd been in and out of consciousness the whole time, my brain cycling through recovery protocols, rewiring itself, trying to make sense of the new architecture. I felt different, lighter, but also weaker, like I'd been sick for months and was only now recovering. She ran cognitive tests, memory, motor control, problem solving. I passed most of them, but slower than before. The lightning-fast calculations were gone. I had to actually think through problems now, step by step, like a normal person. It was frustrating. It was wonderful. My technical skills were diminished but not destroyed. I could still interface with systems, still run basic net running protocols. But the intuitive mastery I'd had, the ability to navigate digital space like physical territory, that was gone. I'd have to relearn everything, build new skills on top of damaged foundations. The emotional impact was harder to track. I felt things more intensely now. Guilt, especially. Memories kept surfacing. Things I'd done while under the processor's influence, orders I'd executed without question. People I'd hurt, lives I'd ruined in service of corporate objectives. Reyes said that was normal. The processor had been suppressing emotional processing, preventing guilt and empathy from interfering with mission parameters. Now that it was gone, I was experiencing delayed reactions to years of accumulated trauma. In simpler terms, I was falling apart. But at least I was falling apart as myself. On the 5th day, I could walk unaided. The connection between brain and chrome limbs was still unstable, but functional. I practiced moving around the clinic, relearning coordination, building new neural pathways. Reyes showed me news feeds from Night City. Sarah's data had gone public. Multiple outlets had run with it simultaneously, too many for Arasaka to silence. The evidence was damning. Internal memos discussing the augmentation program's true purpose, medical records showing psychological conditioning, testimony from former employees who'd escaped. The corpo response was predictable. Denial. Accusations of fabricated evidence, threats of legal action against the journalists. But the story had momentum. Other victims were coming forward. People who'd undergone similar conditioning in other corporations. It wasn't just Arasaka. This was industry standard. Public outcry was building. Not enough to bring down the corporations, nothing ever was, but enough to force investigations, new regulations, oversight committees. Small changes, incremental progress. Sarah was in protective custody, hidden somewhere outside the city. The last footage of her showed a woman who looked tired but determined. She'd sacrificed her career, her safety, possibly her future to expose this. Because of her, I'd had a chance to escape. Because of her, hundreds of others might avoid the same fate. I owed her everything. Reyes told me I could leave whenever I was ready. She'd given me everything she could. The rest of the recovery would happen on my own, over months, maybe years. I asked where I should go. She shrugged. Anywhere but here. Badlands are getting hot. Too much corpo attention. Head south, maybe, or north to the Free States. Somewhere you can disappear. Build something new. I thanked her. Paid her what I could, though she insisted it wasn't necessary. She'd done this for Sarah, she said. For all the people the corporations had broken. I left the clinic at dawn, driving a different vehicle, older, less trackable. The Badlands stretched out in every direction, empty and infinite. For the first time in my life, I had no mission. No orders, no objectives, just open road and uncertain future. It was terrifying. It was freedom. I ended up in a small town near the border, the kind of place that barely existed on official maps. Population maybe 200, mostly people who'd fled Night City or other urban centers, looking for something simpler. I rented a room above a bar, paid in cash, didn't ask questions. The chrome made me stand out, but nobody commented. Half the people here had augmentations, visible markers of previous lives. I found work as a technician, fixing old hardware, maintaining solar arrays, helping with basic network infrastructure. Simple stuff. Nothing like the high-level net running I'd done before. But it was honest work. Nobody was getting hurt. Nobody was being manipulated. I lived quietly, kept to myself mostly. Some nights I'd sit on the roof of the bar, watching the stars, clear out here in ways they never were in the city. I'd think about Sarah, hoping she was safe. I'd think about Emily, my sister, wondering if she'd forgive me if I ever found the courage to contact her. Sometimes I'd feel the gaps in my memory, blank spaces where the processor had overwritten parts of my life. I'd lost years of experience, chunks of skill and knowledge. I was less capable than I'd been, but I was more human. The chrome was still there. The legs, the hand, the optics, I'd probably carry them until I died. But they were just tools now, not masters. I controlled them, not the other way around. Reyes had warned me that I'd never be fully normal again, that the integration had changed my brain in permanent ways. She was right. I processed information differently than I had before the chrome, thought in patterns that weren't quite natural. But they weren't corporate patterns either. They were mine. Damaged, rebuilt, flawed, but mine. Late at night, when sleep wouldn't come, I'd plug into local networks just to see. The digital space was still there, still beautiful in its architecture of light and logic, but I navigated it differently now. Slower, more carefully, with consideration for the consequences of my actions. I wasn't the netrunner I'd been. I'd never be that good again. But I was okay with that, because being that good had cost me everything that mattered. My humanity, my identity, my soul, if such things existed. I'd gotten some of it back. Not all, maybe not even most, but enough. Enough to remember my sister's name. Enough to feel guilt when I thought about the people I'd hurt. Enough to choose, really choose, what kind of person I wanted to be going forward. The Chrome had tried to erase me, to replace Marcus Thorne with an efficient, obedient, optimal corporate asset. It had almost succeeded. But here I was, still fighting, still human, still myself. That victory felt small most days. Insignificant compared to the scope of what the corporations were doing, the millions of people being conditioned and controlled across the world. But it was mine. And in Night City, in this world of chrome and neon and corporate control, sometimes a small victory was all you could hope for. Sometimes surviving with your humanity intact was the only revolution that mattered. I'm still here, still breathing, still choosing. That's something. That's enough.